Welcome to In Focus. I'm your host, Thuy Phan. Every year when the summer months roll in, something special happens in the Leona Valley of California. The cherry trees become ripe for the picking. Join me as I take you to a family-owned cherry orchard and find out what it's like to have 550 of these trees as your backyard. If you like fruit, and if you like your fruit fresh, homegrown, and tree ripened, then there is no better place for you to be than in a U-Pick farm, especially if that fruit I speak of is cherries. Joe Lucido, who owns Amber's Cherry Farm in Leona Valley, started out in the field of marketing and then accounting. He moved out to this area for a change of pace and found himself farming cherries.
I moved out here in 1996 looking for some space. There was no trees out here when I essentially moved out. And my neighbor, his name was Big John, his orchard was next door, talked me into growing cherries. I wanted to put a baseball diamond out here for my son, and he says, he has a real friendly old guy. He said, "Oh no, Joe, you got to put cherry trees out here. I'll help you plant them." And so I brought in 150 cherry trees. He brought his tractor out, and he augured a bunch of holes for me, and that's how I got into the cherry business.
While cherries are a delight to eat and pick, growing them takes real skill and a lot of knowledge.
Cherry trees need about 400 hours of freeze time. Essentially, you've got to have a freeze up here. It has something to do with maintaining the sap in the tree. All right, they have to go dormant for starters, and you need that freeze in order for the tree to go completely dormant. It has a climate, 4 seasons of climate. It's beautiful up here. You have flowing hills. You have a lot of beautiful scenery. It's cooler in the summertime than down in Los Angeles. And people like to get away from LA. It's a refuge. It's a relatively inexpensive place for people and families to come up and spend the day. It's not Disneyland, but it's not as expensive as Disneyland. A family could come up here any Saturday afternoon and spend as little as $20 on a bucket of cherries, and the kids would have a good time picking the cherries.
While farmers need the cold temperatures to grow the fruit, it can also work against them if they're not careful.
Every April up here we have at least 1 or 2 freezes where the temperature will drop below freezing, and sometimes in the 20s. A lot of orchards have been frozen out up here. Last year, all but a couple orchards were frozen out. Mine was not frozen out because I use what's known as smudge pots. They are orchard heaters. They're sanctioned by LA County. I can show you what they look like. They're over by the barn. I have 70 of them. They burn diesel fuel. And when the temperature drops below 30 degrees, and sometimes in the 20s, I run out here and I light the smudge pots, and they ignite a big plume of diesel fuel, and they keep the trees from freezing. And before I got the smudge pots, I got frozen out on more than one occasion. And there would be a freeze during blossom time on April 1st. Then there would be freezes when I have very small cherries out on the trees. You notice that the ground out here is all plowed. It's been proven at UC Davis that bare dirt retains daytime heat. And what happens is it's like a radiator. During the daytime it'll absorb the heat, and at night it'll radiate it out. And that's a natural way of keeping the trees warm during freeze conditions. So there's a lot of, plus the other thing you do is you prune the trees so that you have a natural canopy, because it's like a blanket. When you have a lot of leaves on top, like a blanket when you're in bed, that will protect the trees also.
Another big problem they have are birds. Just like us humans, they love a ripe cherry when they can get it.
One of the biggest predators we have are birds. Birds will literally strip a tree of cherries. And if you don't have some means of protection of basically trying to keep these birds away, you're going to lose your entire crop. Other types of other types of problems you have with cherries are aphids. Anybody who's ever had a garden will see that black aphids they don't go after the cherries, but they will go after the leaves. Ground squirrels, you will have gophers. Gophers will dig under a tree and eat the roots. There are a number of predators, boars, for example, and boars will come into a tree when a tree is weak. It's not been watered properly. So there are a number of enemies of trees and subsequently the cherries.
While Lucido's farm is not one of the bigger ones in Leona Valley, it has one of the most in terms of variety and fruit.
There are as many as 50 cherry varieties. Cherries originated in the country of Iran, and they've gravitated out here to the United States. We have 21 cherry varieties. I try to pick the cherries that most people will like. One, they like sweet cherries. Two, they like large sweet cherries. Three, they like early large sweet cherries. The other thing I try to do is have a variety of cherries that will last the entire season. So I'll get cherries that are early, cherries that are in the middle of the season, and cherries that are late in the season. So if we go out in the orchard, you're going to see red cherries, dark red cherries, you're going to see yellow cherries, and you're even going to see some green cherries, because those are going to be my June 23rd cherries and my June 30th cherries. So you don't want all the cherries to ripen at the same time, because you can't sell them all in one weekend. And if they get too ripe, they'll simply over-ripen and fall off the tree. So you have to try to go ahead and spread out the supply of cherries to meet the demand over the cherry season. The most popular is Bing. We have 267 trees of Bing. Most of the orchards out here, their primary cherry is going to be Bing. Bing is a commercial variety that's been very popular over generations. It's a large, dark red cherry. It's not the largest dark red, but it's very sweet. It's a very hardy cherry, and it's able to weather a lot of adverse conditions and freeze conditions. Of course, since then, Cornell University and a lot of other universities have developed more freeze-resistant varieties. We have 4 new cherries, Black Pearl, Ebony Pearl, Radiance Pearl, and Burgundy Pearl. They were developed and produced in upstate New York. And if anybody's been to upstate New York in the wintertime, that's probably colder there in the state of Alaska, ideally. So they've developed freeze-resistant cherries. I basically introduced about 40 of those trees up here, and I've got a couple available that you can try. So, you know, there's many varieties of cherries, many more being developed, many hybrid cherries. You'll also see that I have grafted one type of cherry tree onto another type of cherry tree onto another type of cherry tree. That way, I can actually confuse everybody.
Although he has been in this business for some time now, he's made many mistakes, but is the better for it.
You have to basically learn how to grow a cherry. You have to learn what makes a healthy tree, how to fertilize a tree. You've got to learn that you have pollinators. For example, you can't just go to the store and buy a cherry tree. You have to know what type of tree will pollinate another type of cherry tree. That's why we have different varieties. For example, a Rainier tree will pollinate a Bing tree. A Bing tree will pollinate a Titan tree, and so on. So the other thing you have to do is you have to, there's just a number of factors that you have to learn about cherries. I make constant mistakes. One year, out of freeze protection, I had heard that orchards were using sprinklers to keep their trees from freezing. And I tried that out here. It failed miserably. Instead of losing 20% of my crop, I lost 95% of my crop, because the water just literally froze onto the leaves. Come to find out, you have to keep the sprinklers going constantly. As soon as you stop, the tree will freeze. So I would not recommend that method to anybody.
With over 550 trees and each one producing roughly 100 pounds of cherries, he sells close to 55,000 pounds of cherries every year. That is a whole lot of cherries. Because of that, and because of one other reason, he's not too concerned that you taste test a lot in the field.
Funny thing about cherries is they're a natural laxative. The human body can only ingest so many cherries. You notice I have a lot of porta potties out here? There's a particular reason for that. So essentially, yeah, I mean, there are people that will come up and they will eat, but even the largest man can only eat so many cherries. And at some point in time, you're going to have those people that are going to abuse the system and my good-hearted nature. But most people, 99% of the people come up here and they pick cherries. They put them in the bucket, they bring them up to my counter, I weigh them, and they really appreciate you know, the cherries. They like to take them home. People come from all over the world to pick cherries. We have people from Asia that love to pick the Rainier cherries because they're very popular back there. So essentially, yeah, it's a very good business, and people will be. There are a few that will abuse the system, but most people are very good people, and they'll buy their cherries.
For Lucido, being a cherry farmer has its ups and downs, but the ups far outweigh the downs.
It's one of those type of occupations where you can actually see the fruits of your labors, literally. It's a lot of hard work, but it's very lucrative, and I enjoy having the families come up here. You'll see kids playing in the orchard and having picnics. They have little wagons up here where the parents can take the kids around in little wagons and pick the cherries. Families really appreciate this type of activity, and it's really enjoyable to share that with others.
Coming up after the break, find out more about these cherry trees and what it takes for them to produce so much fruit. You definitely don't want to miss it. Stay with us.